Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Becoming LawyHer podcast. I'm your host, Hadiyah, and today we are digging into what I think is one of the most critical and sometimes overwhelming aspects of the law school journey, which is how to apply strategically. We all know that law school applications are more than just numbers on a page, right? They are about understanding your strengths, owning your challenges, and telling a story that feels both authentic and compelling. But how exactly do you do that? Especially when you're staring down maybe a GPA that you're not necessarily proud of, and LSAT percentiles and personal statement drafts. To help us make sense of all of it, we are joined by Mike Spivey, the founder and owner of Spivey Consulting, who has hired former top admissions officers to work with him and countless applicants to navigate this process with clarity and confidence. Today, we'll cover everything from addressing a low GPA or LSAT score to building relationships with recommenders. Straight out of undergrad or coming back to law after a few years in another field, this episode will give you practical tools to approach your application with strategy and maybe a little bit more of peace of mind. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me and for your efforts in helping inform people about not just, how to be a great lawyer, but how to have a strategic application, which is what we're going to talk about.
We are so excited to have you. And so for a little context with our viewers, we have been interviewing deans of admissions at law schools across the country to help you all have a better sense of what and how each application component should look like. And today we are joined with someone who does this for a living in terms of actually helping applicants like you apply to law school and do so strategically. Just to ground us, Mike, I'd love if you could help us think through just broadly about how you tailor your application strategy based on the competitiveness of the school you're applying to. Can you talk about how the same GPA or LSAT score might be perceived differently at a top 14 law school versus maybe a regional school or a school that is not as competitive?
Yeah. And before that, I do want to click on something you said very important in the intro, which is more than just numbers. And there will always be some people who push back and say it's just numbers. So let me disprove that. And it's very easy. Every year at the same law school, you'll see some people with the same exact GPA and the same exact LSAT get admitted, waitlisted, and denied with the same LSAT and the same GPA. So by definition, it's more than just numbers. We can prove it. Now, numbers are very important. If you were to invest, if you only had $100 and you could invest it with an hour call with me or a $100 LSAT prep course, I would say put it towards the LSAT prep course. You can't put it towards redoing a GPA, but numbers are probably more important. But as U.S. News and World Report has diminished the weight of the numbers, this holistic side, interviews, application strategy, in the last 2 years has become more important. Now, to get to your question about numbers, I don't see a difference between T14 and outside 14. What I see is, are you at a school's target medians, whether it's the 14th ranked school, the second ranked school, or the 100th ranked school? Are you below their medians or are you above? So let's say you're applying to a top 3 school and you're above both medians. You have a 178 and a 4.1. We tend to tell those applicants, you can be a little bit more risk averse. And I'll give you an example. I helped an applicant years ago who applied to Yale who was not above both medians. And Yale has what's called a 250 word essay. He wrote about his first kiss because it was a very amusing story where he tried to kiss someone and then he ran away. Mm-hmm. And it was a humanizing story. If this applicant had 178 and a 4.0, we probably wouldn't have done that. We would have done a little bit more of a risk tolerant 250. But if you're below both medians, put your foot to the metal, pedal to the metal, and go for it. Again, it doesn't matter if it's T30, T50, T80. You want to look at your scores versus the medians of the schools you're applying to and tailor your strategy, whether you want to be a little bit more risk tolerant or risk averse, depending on whether you're at, above, or below the medians. Is that helpful?
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. And I appreciate what you said at the beginning about numbers not meaning as much as like we and applicants hold them out to be. One thing I always hold on to when I was applying to law school is something that the dean of Yale Law School always said during her informational sessions, which is that they could admit everyone. They could fill up their entire class of 200 people with applicants who got a 180 on the LSAT or had a 4.0 GPA, and they routinely do not do that. I am evidence that they do not do that. I applied, with an LSAT score that was not even in conversation with their medians. And so I appreciate you, echoing that sentiment. But along the lines of medians, I really want us to get into this because I think sometimes people don't understand what they mean, right? Like they see 50% of people got this or 75% of people got this. Like, how could it truly be that they are looking at it with a holistic review? And so how do you think should be looking at medians when they are thinking about their chances, and I guess maybe expanding upon that risk tolerance analysis that you gave?
Yeah, so medians are your friends. It's really good that law schools only report to the ABA their median LSAT, their median GPA versus their average LSAT and average GPA. Median simply means midpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So let's take your alma mater, Yale. Their median LSAT's a 175, I believe, or maybe it's a 174. It's something extraordinarily high. What that means, let's say it's a 174. What that means is 50%, half of the people matriculating to Yale are at a 174 and above, and half are below. The midpoint is 175, 174. Or if you're applying to Vanderbilt with a 169, the midpoint is a 169. Why is that better than averaging? Because if schools were to report the average, they would not be taking. If your median is a 169, you can take people with a 152. It's simply a data point below that midpoint.
Right.
If you were averaging, you would be incredibly disincentivized to take someone with a 152 or a 159. You would see this cluster that's not holistic right around 169 if that was your average. Beauty of median is if I'm a dean of admission at Vanderbilt, where I started my career in admissions, and I am afforded the ability, because I only am reporting medians to the ABA, I can take chances on people with 152 LSAT that I couldn't if I were recording the average. A great example is someone we've had on our firm's podcast. His name is Justin Ishbia. We took a chance. He was our last person admitted off the wait list. I have his permission. He was in the mid 150s, and our median was in the high 160s. If we reported average, we never likely would have admitted him. Right. But we admitted him, and he's a billionaire now. He owns the Phoenix Suns. He proved the data wrong. I love that story. He's a co-owner of the Phoenix Suns.
Wow,
he punched way above his LSAT, and we were afforded the ability to look at his application holistically and look at all the wonderful things in his application that you and I will talk about later, and quote, take a chance. So when you look at medians, I would encourage an applicant to realize that if that school's median is a 174, that means 50% of the people at that entering class are below a 174. So if you have a 169 and you're applying to Yale, there are people at Yale with 169s, 165s. Does that sort of help clarify?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think it does, or at least I hope it does, for people to see that really the difference between an average and knowing that there are real existing human beings below that number, even far below that number of what they see on the median.
And I would say far below, and that's what median allows you as an admissions officer to do. You can take someone with the 152 if your median is a 169, because it's not averaged. It's just one data point below the median.
And I will also add too that I think a lot of schools, if not all schools, report on their 509 report the lowest LSAT score that they accepted to. So I think that can also provide some helpful context.
Yeah, if I'm applying to law schools, I'm saying 50% of, if the median's a 169 or 165, 50% of the people admitted were below that 165. So it's not like I'm banking on that school if I'm a 160, but I'm saying there are people who certainly made it.
Right. And I hope now with that framing, that context, you all can see the importance then, if you are below that, about being strategic about the rest of your application so that you can better your chances in getting in. But I want to turn to the other part of this like median conversation, which is about GPA. You may have seen this video recently of Dean Z in her blog post where, she answers questions from interested applicants. And one thing that kind of caught fire on TikTok was her referring to a 3.4 GPA as low, which of course is just relative to University of Michigan, but I think a lot of people were kind of like shocked by this. And so I think like there are also a lot of people who have 3.4 or lower. And so when you see someone with, let's say, a 3.4, how do you help them think about whether that is truly low in the context in which to think about that GPA, going back to the medians?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. And I know Dean Z well, so I don't want to speak for her. She's more than able to speak for herself
Right.
very eloquently. What I would think of if I were to say a 3.4 were low, and if I were the dean of admission at elite school, what I'm really saying is it's pretty well below our median. I think I'm guessing Michigan's in the upper 3.8 or lower 3.9. So what I would be saying if I were to say a 3.4 is low is I'd be saying it's pretty significantly below what our median is. I would also bet you a lot of money there are a number of students walking around Michigan Law School who had a 3.4 or lower, and they probably had 3.4s maybe 10 years ago. So grade inflation is real. I just posted on my LinkedIn page the median GPAs of schools 10 years ago versus now. I'll pin it at the top so people can see it.
Yeah.
It's just Mike Spivey LinkedIn. The difference between median GPAs now, I mean, one school went from a 3.5 to a 3.9.
Wow.
Right. So 3.5 10 years ago was what their midpoint was, and now the midpoint is 3.9. I think we are heading toward a world where a school is going to have a median of a 4.0 GPA.
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
Because again, it's median, not average. So half the applicants will be 4.0 or above. And that's because of grade inflation. COVID had a huge impact, and which is also what Dean Z may have been referring to. COVID had a huge impact on taking average GPAs for colleges and jacking them way up. But even before COVID, grade inflation was real. I graduated from Vanderbilt in 1995. In 1995, I'm guessing the midpoint of Vanderbilt graduates was around a 3.4, 3.5. I'm guessing now that's like 3.7 to 3.8. So GPA inflation impacts. I would just say, again, to this whole point that we've been talking about, if you're applying to a law school and you have a 3.4 and their median is 3.8, you're far from dead in the water. There are people in Michigan law who have a 3.4. Ideally, you're not below both medians. So
Right.
ideally, you don't have an LSAT that's a 160 when their median is a 170. So you kind of when you're applying to a stretch, you're really talking about you're below the median GPA and below the median LSAT. I'm going to use a little different wording than Dean Z. I don't see a 3.4 as necessarily low if you also have a 178. You're a splitter. You have a very strong LSAT. Now, what Dean Z would say is, well, Mike, there are thousands of applicants in my applicant pool who have higher than a 3.4. So and she would know her data much better than me. What I would say is there are 3.4s at Michigan, but in an ideal world, if you do have a 3.4 and you're applying to Michigan, your LSAT's above their median.
Right. And I think, too, a point that she was making, and I think I actually saw a follow-up video that she posted recently, which is what my thought was when she posted it, is that the term low is sometimes people connotate that to things that it's never meant to connotate, like bad student, not good, like not qualified to go to law school, and like it's not any of those things. I think her hope in sharing that was to say, like, to be candid about what their data points look like, right? Like in comparison to the scores that they're getting, and to put students almost kind of like on notice, if they weren't on notice, that you really should spend a lot of other time, strengthening the rest of your application if relatively you are at that bottom half, because like, as you said, you do have a chance. It's just about how you swim out of like being in that bottom half.
Yeah. I mean, having done having done admissions, my guess, and it's just a guess, and maybe this is what Dean Z did say in the follow-up video, applicants so often think of themselves as in a vacuum. Okay, I have a 3.6 and I worked really hard. But what they're not considering is there are 2,000 or 3,000 applicants to Michigan with a 3.7 or higher. And she was just trying to probably describe the lay of the land. It doesn't mean she was saying that a 3.4s don't get admitted. I think she was just likely trying to, describe the lay of the land for the applicant pool.
Yeah, for sure. And so since we've addressed that, I'm curious if you have thoughts on how applicants should address these issues head on, particularly if an applicant has even a lower GPA than a 3.4, maybe 3.2, 3.0, a 2.8, what are the strategies that you can advise your clients on how to address those issues?
Yeah, my foundation would be, is there a reason that's not an excuse, but a legitimate reason that I graduated from Starfleet Academy? I'll make up a school so no school gets mad at me. And I probably would have had a 3.7 if not for a family member being ill or sadly terminally ill, and me having to commute back and forth and bombing that semester. I see this all the time. This is a real reason why someone might have a really bad semester. They had a 3.8 and they were on a plane every weekend to see their ailing grandparent or parent or sibling. And that one semester they had a 2.2 and their 3.8 dropped to a 3.4. 100% write a GPA addendum about that. Admissions officers, we're not in a world of AI making admissions in law school yet. I think applicants often think of admissions officers as maybe robotic, cold, callous people, and they're not. They're humans. They were nervous applicants. I mean, of the 40-ish consultants in my firms, almost all of them, and so that's 250 years of admissions officer experience. But before they were admissions officers, they were nervous applicants. So you remember when you're in admissions that you were a nervous applicant, and you remember that you had struggles in your life. I gave you one example, but there are as many as there are applicants. Definitely write about the challenges that may have impacted your semester, your year, or your 4 years. Another one would be if you worked all 4 years. Was in touch with an applicant who had a full-time job all 4 years of college. Of course, their GPA is likely going to be lower if they're working 8 hours a day and taking breaks to go to class and then going back to work. 100%. What you don't want to do is say, and I see this all the time, sadly, when I was in admissions, if not for this one faculty member who had it out for me, I would have had a 3.9. That's when you're in the realm of, okay, well, what was the situation, not the finger pointing.
Right.
If you're finger pointing, bad idea. If you're describing a GPA that's lower, and it really does, if you're right below the median GPA, you probably don't want to be writing an addendum. If the median GPA is a 3.8 and you're a 3.4, yeah, if there's a legitimate reason, I think a 2-paragraph, you don't want to go over a page, a 2-paragraph, this was the situation. Every weekend I was flying home to see someone who was sick. I think that really can, it causes the admissions officer to humanize the applicant and say, I get it. I get why they're 3.8. What was a 3.8 turned into a 3.5.
For sure. And I think too, it goes to the point that admissions officers don't know what you don't tell them. And so if you have this issue, like you said, you had an ailing person in your family, you had to work, maybe you had some really strong mental health issues, if they don't know this information, then they just leave the gap though. Well, they just didn't get the grades. And so to your point, I think it is helpful if you can address it in a way, right, that's not giving an excuse. And I think I'm curious as to your thoughts about this too. Like there is still importance of taking ownership, right? Regardless of the surrounding circumstances of just taking ownership of the grades, but then providing the context. And then maybe if possible, if you improved or, created a different study plan, whatever that resolution was, sharing that too, maybe.
Yeah. I think there's two things there. You nailed it. You don't want them filling in the gap themselves. If you were applying to Yale and you went all of a sudden from a 3.8 to a 3.5 without any explanation, an admissions committee might say, wow, did this person all of a sudden discover alcohol? You don't want them filling in that gap when the reality might have been that you were visiting a friend who was sick every weekend because you care so deeply about them. So that's point number one. Your second question again about that? Can you
Yeah.
remind me?
Oh, yeah. No, the second question was about the importance of taking ownership, regardless of the fact that you might
Oh,
have.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would agree that no matter how, I mean, if you read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, we always have choice and we always have free will, no matter what. And this is someone who was in a Nazi concentration camp,
Mm.
who had found the ability to inspire others during the most challenging of time. If Viktor Frankl, I think this is a book everyone should read, were to be applying to law school, he would have a great GPA addenda. I had all these struggles, but I guarantee he would end it with, but at the end of the day, my GPA was also my responsibility. And I do not mean for this to sound like an excuse. I just wanted to color in some of my life experience. I wanted to share with you something that was going on, but I do take ownership of the fact that I was still a student at Princeton University and I was still going to class, but I thought also knowing that I was taking care of a sick family member might color in some of my last 4 years.
Certainly. And so for applicants who are coming in and applying with an advanced degree, like a master's or a PhD, how much does that help offset a lower undergraduate GPA?
Yeah, it's a great question. The GPA itself isn't going to stand out because almost all masters and PhD GPAs are astronomically high.
Mm-hmm.
Except for maybe my PhD GPA. I'm the outlier. But most people have a 4.0 or a 3.9. So there's zero. Admissions is about one word, differentiation. You can differentiate with numbers. You can differentiate with life experience, etc. There's no differentiation in a business school GPA because it's all like 3.9 or 4. There's no differentiation with a master's or PhD GPA. But the PhD itself is highly differentiating. There's probably only every cycle, I'm going to guess 1% of applicants have PhDs or less.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm applying to Yale and I have a PhD, I'm talking about not the PhD GPA, but what I learned in my PhD program. What was my dissertation? So in my doctoral program, it was goal setting. Talking about like the nuances of goal setting probably would be fascinating to 9 out of every 10 admissions officer. So that would be the differentiating point. What was my area of research? What was it that I was so passionate about that made me get a master's in fine arts or business school or whatever? That, it's the subject matter, the knowledge base, the passion for that knowledge base. A master's in creative writing because I love writing.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you want to talk about, not the GPA and the advanced degree program.
Okay. So your thought is that it's the substance of the work and not necessarily the output in terms of the metric of a GPA that really makes a difference.
Yeah. What were you doing in those 2, 3, 4, 5 years that caught you on fire as far as learning versus what is the number at the end of those 2, 3, 4 years? Because that number is not going to differentiate you at all. But what you were doing in those 2, 3, 4 years, where you caught fire, my passion was goal setting. I would love to be interviewed on that because I would light up. And then the other person by nature would kind of get enthusiastic about it.
Yeah, I love that. So we talked
Is
about
goal setting a weird is that a weird passion? Because
well, you're the first I've heard to have it, but I think it is a very important trait to have. Certainly, more of our youth should be inspired to set some goals for sure.
And one goal could be, hey, I'm going to apply to these 10 law schools and I'm going to do my best to get into all 10.
Exactly. And so we talked a little bit about GPA addendums, but I want to talk too about LSAT addendums and when you think it's an appropriate time to write one and what does an effective LSAT addendum look like?
Yeah. So there's 2 times where it's appropriate. The most common would be if you take it more than 3 times. And I love giving examples. So I'll give you an example. I helped a client of our firms who was in South Korea. His wife was in New York City. He literally wanted to be at Columbia or NYU for really good reason. These 2 schools in New York City have the best placement in big law.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to go to big law to provide for my family. And it has to be New York City to be with my wife. So he took the LSAT 5 times. Well, that addenda wrote itself. My wife is in your city. If admitted, I will come. And I am so committed to Columbia or NYU law school. And obviously, you wouldn't say both. So if you're applying to NYU, you would say, I am so committed to NYU. I'm going to take it 5 times until I nail it. And by the way, nailing it would probably mean at or 1 above the median. So that's what he did. He took it, and then he took it and got the 174 he needed, and then he applied. And that, again, there was a great reason. The
Yeah.
second time would be if you jump up significantly in a score. And I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, please. Yeah. Please expand.
Well, so if you take it more than 3 times and you have a reason why you took it a fourth, and the reason very well might be, I really want to be at your school. Here's why. But the other time you would write an addenda would be if you scored something like a 155 on your first take and a 177 on your second take. I mean, that's so far beyond the realm of standard deviations that, I mean, the standard measurement of error is something like +3, -3, or close to that. So a 155 to a 158 would not require an explanation. A 165 to a 169, no. But if you go from a 160 to a 180, people are going to raise eyebrows because it's statistically incredibly rare. And there's many good reasons why that may have happened. You may have taken it the first time and had the flu, and the second time you felt completely fine. So 3 sentences saying, I took it the first time, all my practice tests were in the upper 170s, I had the flu, I probably shouldn't have taken it. You're taking ownership. So it's on me. But I took it the second time and got a 180, and that 180 was around where I was practicing. Where you don't want to write an addenda is, again, if you're making excuses. Oh, it was the marching band making noise downstairs. How dare they? So if you're finger pointing, bad idea. If you're pointing at yourself, good idea.
Okay. I have a follow-up question into that about pointing at yourself. So I talk to a lot of applicants who, when they're first getting into this journey of applying to law school, they think, oh, let me just take the LSAT just to see where I am starting. Like, not take a practice test, but like take the official test. And they do that, and obviously a lot of them score way lower than they do when they like studied a substantial amount of times. So I've talked to some applicants who end up taking the test, the first time is like fluke, and then the second time they get some version of prep, and then by the third and fourth time they're like very seriously studying for prep. Do you think that is something worthy enough to explain in an addendum?
Well, are you talking about practice diagnostic tests, or if you take the test, the real test 3 times?
Yeah, the real test. Like, you take
score?
the real test without studying. I know many people who do that. I don't know, like, who's giving
Right.
advice out there, but it is like a thought that like people think, oh, let me just take the official one just to see where I'm at and like, how I will do without studying at all.
Yeah, it's funny. I wasn't understanding you because I also think that's a horrible idea.
Right.
You should take many diagnostic tests, but from what I'm hearing from you, there are people who just walk into the test center,
Do.
that's the old days, who go to their laptop and take the test. So to begin with, don't do that. But if you do that, and you score a 150, and then you take it again and you score a 160, and then you take it again and score a 170, which was kind of like, I think, your example, 100%. But take ownership. Dear admissions committee, I approached this in the worst way possible. I didn't listen to what people were saying, and I just walked up to my laptop without studying, got a 150. I realized that was a mistake. That's my mistake. No one's mistake but mine. And then I committed to studying, and I got a 160. But you know what? I knew if I studied more, I would do better. And then I got a 170. And only that 170 gets reported to the ABA. Only that 170 goes to U.S. News and World Report. So whatever someone's saying online, the admissions office they see the 150, they see the 160, but boy, are their eyes on that 170, because that's the only score that gets recorded.
Right. Another follow-up question to the LSAT addenda. I'm wondering if you've ever worked with a client who has learning disabilities, and if so, what advice would you give them about how comfortable applicants should be about disclosing that, whether that's in the context of an LSAT addendum, or maybe it's something that they just feel like they want to disclose or mention in their personal statement. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. At the end of the day, that's a personal decision. People are private about all kinds of things. But what I would say is I would ping back to that. The person reading your application probably has had a lifetime where they've had their own struggle, maybe their own learning disability, or maybe a close friend growing up who had a learning disability. They're probably not judging you, even if you think they might be. So I would tip towards doing 2 things. One, if I have a diagnosed learning disability, I would 100% tip toward trying to get test accommodations from LSAC and get more time vis-a-vis that diagnosis, that medical diagnosis. And I would also tip towards, writing, don't write an addenda if you score a 180 and say I scored a 180, but I have a learning disability, and boy, could have I scored it 5 times in a row. I mean, but if you think it negatively impacted your LSAT score, I think you'd be surprised how compassionate. I mean, to your point, it's a great one. Admissions officers want to hear your story. They don't want to hear it in a 5-page, oversharing way, but in a 2 to 3 to 4 paragraph. This has been my life. I've had ADHD all my life, and my GPA has been a 4.0. But my test scores have consistently been lower than what you might think vis-a-vis my GPA because of my ADHD. They want to know that.
Right. Yeah, that's super helpful, and I hope it gives people comfort. And I appreciate you bringing up the accommodations piece, because I think that sometimes there can be a bit of a stigma around getting accommodations and shame around that. And I hope people who need accommodations feel affirmed in doing their thing that is going to help them test at the ability of their peers.
Yeah, there's so many conditions out there. Like if I was diagnosed with OCD or Tourette syndrome, I would be harming myself by not getting accommodations.
Right.
So not just getting accommodations, but again, sharing that with the admissions office. I think it's valuable information for people to know.
Super helpful. Well, I want to switch this away. Hopefully, our viewers are probably sick of if LSAT gives them anxiety. We'll talk about something else that in this strategy round, which is, in my opinion, undervalued, which is timing. So, in this segment, I really want us to talk through timing first about when someone applies in terms of their life, like right where they are in life. So for someone who's applying straight through from undergrad, what are some strategies to make their application feel mature and compelling even without those years of experience? And also too, if you could, help contextualize like what it means to be like K through JD from an admissions lens and how they're viewing that applicant, that would be helpful too.
Yeah, it's okay. So what K through JD means, and I love that acronym because applicants invented it, not admissions people. So I love the terms that applicants came up with that now admissions people like Dean Z, and I think you're going to have other deans of admissions on your podcast. I love it when we didn't come up with it, but the applicants. So that means kindergarten straight to law school. You did not graduate from college and work for a year or 2 years. I would use myself as an example. In some sense, when I applied to college, I applied to Vanderbilt and many others. When I applied to Vanderbilt, I didn't have 2 years of work experience at Goldman Sachs. I was a kid out of high school. But I had worked since I was like 6 years old. I cut our family's yard I was so young that my parents wouldn't let me use and this would actually be something you could talk about in your application. My parents wouldn't let me use the power lawnmower because I was too young. They thought I would run my foot over. So I had to use this old push thing with a rotary blade, right? So from 6 years old, I was working, and then I expanded that business, and I mowed other people's yards, and then I worked at a convenience store. Then I worked driving a boat. Like, I had to get a Coast Guard approved. So all that work experience that wasn't like a career. I played sports. I was a captain of my football, baseball, and track team. That was leadership experience. So the first part of that is I'm going to guess that even if you're K through JD and you now have 4 years of college or 3 years of college, you have more of those. Did you wait tables? Were you a leader in an organization? Were you a part of the theater group or a sports team? All of that adds maturity of your application. The other thing I would say is if you're K through JD, I would do my best to connect with people like you or people in the professional. It doesn't have to be legal space, but people in the professional space, and get eyes on your application. I had a 12-year-old apply to one of the schools I worked at.
Really?
Believe it or not. She graduated from college at 12. So I would say this is an extreme outlier, but if you're 12, I would probably try to have someone in their 30s and maybe more than one person take a look at my application because I only have 12 years of life experience. So let someone with more life experience. It doesn't have to be an admissions consultant like me. Ideally, they might have a sense of admissions, but someone with professional life experience going over my application with another set of eyes. And they can help you color in that maturity perspective.
Yeah, no, I think that is so important, especially as someone who applied through K through JD, straight through after undergrad. I always tell people, in my opinion, being mature enough to have your application ready was a feat in of itself, because I talk to a lot of people, a lot of undergraduates all the time who have aspirations of going to law school directly after undergrad, and then they get to their senior year and they realize they haven't started studying for the LSAT, they haven't did this, they haven't did that. And so I think it takes even a lot of maturity to pre-plan, right? To, if you're trying to be strategic and, submit early and all of those things as well. But again, to your point, please also talk to people. I talked to a lot of different people. People gave me like, oh, your application is perfect. And then finally I got to someone who gave me some hard truths that I had to swallow about my personal statement. So definitely make sure you are talking to people for sure.
Yeah, if someone's telling you one of the reasons I founded our firm 13 years ago is there's 99 out of every 100 applications I read when I was an admissions officer had a lot of mistakes in them. Odds are your application is far from perfect. It can be buttoned up, whether it's grammatically, editorially, semantically, to your point, how you present yourself. So if I'm 18 and I'm applying to law school, I would love to talk to you because you're going to have a way of comporting yourself that's probably different from an 18-year-old. Believe it or not, I get a number of emails that start off with, "Hey, bro, if you had a mentee who was reaching out to me for help, I guarantee you tell me, you would slash that word bro and say, oh, dear Mr. Spivey."
I think that is...
So that's an extreme example of...
I mean, it's extreme, but honestly, not even necessarily so. Like, this is like a little bit of a tangent, but in my work with LawyHer, we hire interns now. We've had 3 rounds of interns. Almost all of them are Gen Z, right? And it has been interesting to see the dynamics of like what's become professional norms, a lot of which as a fellow Gen Z, I appreciate and encourage, right? Like kind of redefining like what it means to be a professional, all of those things. However, when it comes time to like when you're asking someone for something or in the law school admissions, you want to switch it on to be the most professional version of yourself. And I fear some of those like subtleties about how to greet people and how to interact with people have been lost. And I've heard horror stories from admissions officers about them receiving questions and inappropriate questions at inappropriate times about things. And so it just all goes back to like, if you are someone younger, to have someone who is older to help advise and coach you through this process, even if it's informally.
Yeah, and it's certainly not exclusive to Gen Z. When I was 18, I probably was not purporting myself in a professional way.
For sure.
To the extent that right. Like, I'll give you an example, and this has been a thing of mine for the last 26 years of my entire career. I love it. So professionals like when younger people speak to them professionally. If someone wants to get a free phone call from me, like I just got an email from someone, and apparently I said if anyone could name the movie quote, I would do a free call. The movie was the movie Arrival, and she nailed it. So we're going to do a free phone call. And she put the time of the call in time zone, and you did too. So let's talk. This is exactly what you did to me. Let's talk at 11 a.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Mountain. That to me screams professionalism, because in your work experience, you've had missed phone calls because you have a client in California and you're in New York City or whatever, and no one ever put the time zone. So even little minor things like that, again, differentiation matters. When someone says something that screams professionalism, it just elevates them in my mind. Am I going to deny them because they didn't put a time zone in their email? Of course not. But am I going to think a little bit more about them maybe as a professional if they do? Probably.
Yeah, for sure. So on the flip side of this, for applicants who are coming back to law school after 5 or more years, maybe they're switching careers, what advice do you have for them for positioning that as a strength? And what should they get their recommenders to say about them? I know we'll talk a little bit more about recommenders earlier, but I think this fits. Maybe more nuanced answer for our older applicants.
Yeah. So to begin with, there's a high degree of likelihood that 5 years is a huge strength, and the data would play that out. When we hold numbers steady, GPA and LSAT, and we look at people with work experience, they're getting admitted at a higher rate. Why is that? Because schools now have more pressure than ever before to place their students in jobs. The employment category in bar passage is a substantial part of the rankings. But even before U.S. News changed the weight of their metrics to favor outputs, employment, versus inputs, admissions, it still was the foundation of your law school is to help your students learn and to get jobs, right? So employment is really important to employability is really important to admissions officers now more than ever. And having worked for 5 years to begin with, I mean, you have it in writing that you're employable. You just held a steady job for 5 years or two jobs. You did 2.5 years at Goldman Sachs, and then you did 2.5 years at a nonprofit startup in Afghanistan. That would be beautiful because they're so vastly differentiated. But so employability itself shows that you have the ability to be employable in the future, but also just the way you can speak in an interview. You're probably going to be, you mentioned the word anxiety. If you have 5 years of work experience, you've gone through the interview gauntlet, you're probably going to be a little bit less anxious than if you didn't have those 5 years. I'm in my 50s. I know you thought I was in my 40s, but you were wrong. I'm in my 50s.
I actually thought maybe 35.
Exactly. On video, we have it. I'm about to interview General David Petraeus, the former director of the CIA.
Wow.
So that's a tough interview. There's things that, secrets that General Petraeus is sitting on that I better not ask, or that, it's going to be a fumbled. In my 20s, there's no way I would have been able to interview the former director of the Central Intelligence Agency. But over time, these things, the stakes seem lower. The anxiety goes down. I'm excited for the interview. I'm not nervous. I'm going to guess that someone with 5 years of work experience, they're more apt to say, hey, here is my opportunity to present who I am to this other human being, rather than saying, oh my goodness, it's 5 a.m. I haven't slept a wink because I've been so nervous about this admissions interview.
Yeah.
This is your chance to shine. And I think for someone with 5 years experience, talk about what you've been doing in work. You're just showing the admissions committee, hey, you got this. You've proven to the work world, you've proven to your employer that you're a professional in the market doing good things. So if you're 5 years out, you probably have a leg up on someone straight. And the data supports this, again, K through JD.
For sure. And I also think, too, I hope that this encourages older applicants, because sometimes I think people are like, oh, I'm too old to go to law school. But what you're here saying is that you actually have so much of an advantage in going because you have so much more maturity. And I will just say, from my personal experience, having friends who were older in law school and people I just admired who were older in law school, maybe who had families, who had like a full career, I always admired them because they always approached the work in the class and everything that we did with just like such a level of focus. And in my opinion, sometimes I think you can even probably have better grades if you're older and already have balance, like having like a family and a full-time job, because you just have better those study skill sets and like I said, that focus already. And so hoping people walk away from listening to this knowing that is a strength that you will bring to law school.
100% agree. You stated it better than me.
I want to turn to another applicant made-up term, which are soft factors, or otherwise known as campus involvement, leadership, and quote-unquote soft skills. So when you look at campus involvement or extracurriculars of your clients, what are the kind of experiences or qualities that actually stand out to the admissions committee?
Yeah, let me start with the converse of that. What stands out as negative is when you get a resume of like 600 bullet points and there's no way that person could have been, maybe they went to one meeting for 600 things, but they're just trying to impress a stranger with quantity. And what we're looking for in admissions is quality. Did you help found that group? Those are great ones. We didn't have this, society for the fine arts at my school or a pre-med. I mean, I've seen this for law school applicants. I was interested in going to medical school. I founded the pre-med society, and then I shifted gears and decided I would go to law school, and I joined the pre-law society. You know what impresses me more? Not the joining the pre-law, which is a dime a dozen, going back to differentiation. Exactly, you get it. So if you founded an organization, if you were a leader in an organization, or sincerity, really, like humans are really good for survival reasons, for evolutionary reasons, at detecting authenticity. So if I'm interviewing you or if you're interviewing me and you start talking about something you're passionate about, clearly we know it's not goal setting. But if you start talking about something you're passionate about, that authenticity is going to start shining. So if you were part of a group and you were really passionate about what that group did, then you can have like 6 bullet points on your resume. I would rather have one group or 2 groups with 3 really passionate bullet points than 60 bullet points with no explanation.
For sure. And that there's a whole other conversation about what a law school resume looks like versus like a normal resume, right? And I guess maybe I'll just throw this one at you. The 1-page resume versus the 2 if law school doesn't say what the requirement should.
Yeah, I've always thought that this notion of a 75-year-old lawyer telling an applicant, you got to have a 1-page resume. Yeah, in the 1960s, when there weren't a million opportunities to do things cool and diverse online, internationally, it made sense that there was a requirement for a 1-page resume. In today's world, and you mentioned the difference between a law school resume and a professional resume. In a law school resume, we want you to talk about at the bottom your skills and interests.
Right.
And if you're talking about your interests, don't just say reading. Say, I love reading about historical nonfiction periods during the Victorian era. I mean, if that's what you like.
Yeah.
I'm a former runner, but my passion now, I mean, you keep seeing me drinking water because I'm at 8,000 feet in Colorado right now. My passion is high altitude trail running.
Mm.
And that's differentiating. So if I were to list my interests, it would be reading sci-fi books, reading biographies, high altitude trail running. You know, rather than just saying running, reading, I would say my specific interests, and you can include 6, 7, 8. As long as you're passionate about it, as long as if you're being interviewed, you can speak with passion about it, bring it on. So
Yeah.
I don't think you need to go over 2 pages, but there's nothing wrong with a 2-page resume.
I love that. And you just made me think about what I put on my interest section, which I have not looked at my law school resume in a very long time. But if I had to recall, I think it was something about like event planning. And I think I tried to try in my love for Beyonce in it as well. I don't know how I worded that, but I definitely, I echo your sentiments to like really show your personality there.
So that was a home run to do that. Because, I mean, to begin with, you're differentiating, you're showing your passion. Number 2, what if the dean of admissions reading your file at Yale also had a love for Beyonce? Enjoy
Right.
your admit. What does the research tell us? And this is true for interviews or admissions. If the person who's making the decision has something in common with you, they are going to supersize that commonality. So the president of my firm, Hicks Hawko, she wrote Dungeons and Dragons as one of her interests. Well, she was admitted to 7 of the top 10 law schools. Clearly it didn't hurt her.
Yeah, I love that. So for applicants, though, who feel like they don't have much legal experience, what are some other ways to leverage other types of professional or volunteer work to show readiness for law school?
Yeah, and to be clear, you really do not have to have legal experience to stand out in the application process. I mean, where are you going to get it from? Maybe you interned because your parents knew a lawyer, but no one's going to hold that against you if you weren't connected. One of my favorite clients was someone who knew nothing about football, but she got an internship with NFL Films, which produces football documentaries. And she wrote her personal statement about how fascinating producing those documentaries in the realm of NFL football was, as someone who knew nothing about football before she took that internship. To me, that internship is so much more differentiated than I spent a summer interning at Kirkland & Ellis because my cousin happened to have a family member who worked there. So again, to double click because it's important, do not be dissuaded or intimidated by the fact that you might not have legal experience. Guess what? You have experience. You're 22 years old. You have 24 years old. You have a lifetime of experience doing things. Find the ones you're passionate about. Find the ones you were a leader in and put those in your application. Or find ones where you learned a lot. When I was in college, I waited tables. I learned how to handle angry people at a pretty young age from waiting tables. Because boy, in the service industry, do you have to deal with angry people. That made, I think that stood out in my application process.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I remember when I was applying to Yale Law School, they had like a separate part of their application where they wanted you to literally list like every single job that you worked. And after talking to the Dean Ingberg and some other folks on their admissions team about why they do that is because they really do value like just knowing what you were doing, like what you were up to while you were, but also too, people tend to downplay jobs that aren't traditional, like you said, like waiting tables is a very like your experience. I'm sure your experience waiting tables, like if you were to practice, is very much comparable skill set that you'll need to be able to deal with angry clients, right? Or angry opposing counsel. And so I think that's just helpful to to encourage people to think broadly about their skill set. One thing I'll add too to what you said about not necessarily having legal experience, which I think you're right. I think you're right that you don't need legal experience. One thing that I tried to do when I was in college was trying to get adjacent experience. I had a personal goal to just intern and make money as much as possible. So I literally would intern at this like nuclear defense place, this policy place, other criminal justice policy places. And so really trying to look at nonprofits in your area that work on issue areas that you maybe care about, because that's also a way that you could possibly, if it feels right, tie that into your application.
Yeah, what I would say about that is you did it the right way. I mean, obviously you had really good results. If you had, and I'm going to guess you did not, if you had in your personal statement, because you did something adjacent to the law, offered a legal interpretation, it would have gone south very quickly. Does having legal experience or adjacent legal experience help? Sure. Does purporting to be the world's best lawyer because you spent a summer at Sullivan and Cromwell help? No, because you're not the world's best lawyer. You just interned. So the thin eye of the needle is the experience is great, but most deans of admissions have JDs. What they don't want is an applicant talking about their thorough understanding of the law, because if you're applying to law school, you're not a lawyer.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, very important to say. And to be clear, I think that experience can be helpful for other people, but in particular, in my instance, frame that as how it shaped my world view on the type of law that I want to practice and how I see myself intersecting into
Right.
the world. So to be more clear, the example I used was I was an investigative intern at the Public Defender Service. And so I had a lot of hands-on experience working with their clients. And it really changed how I view public defense and my aspiration to build a different type of system based off of like the things that I learned in that one client experience. So I think, yeah, the takeaway is like, you're not a legal expert. Like, I am not a legal expert on how to represent someone in court, but it did inform the type of lawyer that I want to be because I appreciated what I learned in their specific type of practice model at PDS.
Yeah, you developed a passion for what you wanted to do, and you're still living that passion. And the only reason I brought up the other side is because I've seen that too many times. Someone say, "I would win this case because of my experience." I'd rather say, "I would do this case because of my passion, because of what I learned in that internship." Exactly.
For sure, for sure. So I wanted us to turn to, and we kind of touched on this a little bit, but more broadly talk about recommendations in building relationships. So I know for some students, recommendations can feel like the part of the process where applicants feel like they have the least control over. How do you advise your clients to get the best, the recommenders for them and to write letters that truly benefit them?
Yeah, what the classic mistake is people asking people they don't know well who have fancy titles. So that person might be the CEO of GE, but they're submitting a form letter that's only a paragraph long. And the funny thing about letters of recommendation is that they generally can only hurt you, because you don't ask enemies for letters of recommendation. You ask allies. 49 out of every 50 sound remarkably similar. They use different words, but they're glowing and they're fawning. So there's no positive differentiation. But then you get that 50th, and the person says, "Well, to be frank, I can't speak much about the applicant because I know their parents, but their parents are great people, and I assume this is going to be a great law student. Signed, Justice John Roberts." Okay, so mistake. You go for the home run, huge name in the legal field, and they only say 3 sentences and they clearly don't know you.
Right.
I want to hear from someone, not your preacher at your church or your parents. We literally have read applications from people's parents. Your employer, your coach, your mentor. and I want that person to really know you, like a page worth of knowing you. That's what you want to go for. You don't want to go for they sat in the front row and they had an A plus, but quite frankly, I hardly know this person's name.
And I totally agree with everything you're saying. And I too see people who come to me, so excited because they got this like big name representative or whoever to write their letter of recommendation. And something else that I see, if it's not if the letter is not saying, like I barely know this person, maybe the letter is just like repeating their resume, right? Because this person doesn't have a deep relationship with the person that they asked, but the letter writer who's this fancy title, they don't want to, completely say like, I don't know this person. So they kind of just like regurgitate things from the resume or what they've told them, but don't detail actual interactions or experiences that they've had with them. Do you think that also could hurt the applicant?
100%. If you're handing someone a resume and they're just literally writing the recommendation off of the exact bullet points in your resume as an admissions officer, my mind says, oh, wow, this person doesn't even know the applicant. There's not a single sentence, Sally has a very kind heart, or Bob is an incredibly driven person. If it's just Bob first started at Chili's and then he worked his way up to assistant manager, I'm saying that, this recommender doesn't really know the applicant.
Yeah, that's how I feel too. But I always have such trouble advising applicants on that front because I guess maybe naturally, like reasoning skills, people are like, oh, but they're a judge. Oh, but they are like an alumni of the school. And like they did say like I'm a nice person, but they just didn't work with them. And so it's always so hard for me to explain to them why this is not adding value in the same way that your English professor who you got a really great grade in their class could add a lot of value as a recommender.
I would even tip further. I would say even if it's the TA, the teaching assistant, if you were in their office after hours, super curious about the subject matter, constantly asking, not driving the person crazy, but asking curious questions, and they really got to know you, I would much rather have that TA write a page of really meaningful sentences about you than a Supreme Court justice send in a form letter that we know as admissions officers is a form letter.
So I also know that some applicants wonder whether it helps or hurts to reach out to admissions officers before they apply. And in this context, I guess we can maybe limit it to if you submitted a question to their general inbox or if you showed up to one of their webinars or an in-person law school fair and you interacted with them in that regard. Is there some type of strategy that law school applicants can or should not use in that regard?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. It's just, as a lawyer, you're very familiar with this answer, but it just depends. It depends on how you do it. What you don't want to do is like Facebook friend a dean of admission, and then all of a sudden start emailing them questions without ever having met them. I'm totally fine with an applicant following deans of admissions on LinkedIn or TikTok. But what I'm not fine with is that distance between following them and then hitting them up with, hey, Dean so-and-so, I'm applying to your school. Can you help me? Can you help answer a question for me? Does your school prefer? Because that person's getting 350 emails a day. Do they really have time for a stranger? No. But what would be great would be if you go to a law school forum, the New York City or the DC forum. The DC forum, I think, is coming up. You go to, the NYU table and you meet the dean of admission and you have a 4-minute, 5-minute conversation. It probably shouldn't be much longer because there's 60 people standing behind you who will also want time. And you want to show you have wherewithal of that. But if they say at the end, I'd love to see you apply. And if they give you a card with their email, 100%, then you can follow up and say, I met you at the NYU forum. Thank you. And I would always fit this in. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me and also giving me your contact information. Why would you say that? Because they're actually probably not going to remember you. They met 600 people that day. But when you say, thanks for giving me your card or your contact information, what their mind says is, I like this person enough to encourage them to reach out to me. And then 100% reach out. The other thing is the visit. It's great to email a law school and say, I'm going to be in New York City. I would love to stop by and introduce myself. I know how busy you are. And if it's a student who's going to meet me, I'm so appreciative. But if an admissions officer or the dean of admission has time to meet with me, I promise to be mindful of your time. And I just wanted to say hello. Because then
I
you get
love
that person's, you get the, you have them for a whole cycle. You meet them. So then 6 months later, when your application goes complete, you can say, dear Dean Cummings, I met you 6 months ago when I visited. You told me to stay in touch. I just wanted to let you know my application went complete. And they might go pull that application and read it.
Yeah, I love that. And I especially appreciated that note about flagging that they gave you your card. I had not thought about that, but that's totally smart to mention to them, so that you can, again, the theme of differentiating yourself, that you were differentiated in that moment. As a personal anecdote, when I was applying to law school, I was going to these like admissions fairs, virtual, mostly it was virtual because this was 2020. I've been to for some of them multiple times for the same school. And I was just doing that because I wanted to get as much information as I could possibly. I had no idea that it would be advantageous to me. But naturally, I was just, sending a very polite follow-up email. And to my surprise, when I got admitted into Yale Law School, one of the admissions officers, we were just having a conversation after I had accepted my offer. They told me how they remembered those interactions and how they were, looking for my application. Up to your point about them flagging it, they were looking for it when I submitted. So you never know, the impression that you might leave on people, even when they're meeting hundreds of people a day.
Yeah, and if you did that in a virtual forum or an in-person forum, it's often going to tip in your favor. If you send them a random email or LinkedIn message, it's often going to tip in not in your favor. So you
Yeah.
put in the effort to get to know the school, and the school noticed that, and they remembered your name.
Exactly that. I was not I was not cold messaging or DMing any of the admissions officers. It was just a natural thing, like after the event.
Right. And it can even be more extreme. Derek Meeker at my firm, who used to be the dean of Penn Law, he had someone show up at his apartment, an applicant.
Oh.
Right. So that's clearly in the realm of not a good way to introduce yourself. Right.
Yeah, always use best judgment. I guess is really another thing that they're looking for is your judgment in these interactions, and so to be mindful of that.
And all of us have blind spots. So another thing to do is if you're not sure what to do, bounce it off someone, else. Maybe not your, bar drinking buddy, but someone 10 years older who's taken interest in mentoring you. Hey, is this appropriate? Is it appropriate for me to show up in a t-shirt or a collared shirt? And that person who's been in the workforce for 10 years is going to say, when in doubt, dress a little bit nicer. Your BFF from college might be like, oh yeah, wear that game day t-shirt.
Right. Continuing on from our conversation about timing earlier, when we were talking about, at what point in your life do you apply? Now I want to talk about timing in terms of submitting your application. Thinking, earlier versus submitting the strongest application possible. So I'm curious as to your thoughts about whether it's best to apply early or to wait until you have the strongest version of your application, like if you're retaking the LSAT or rewriting an essay. This is a question that I'm sure you get all the time from people who are like, I'm taking the January LSAT, but the mission, I feel like I'm applying late. Like, what do I do? And I'm hoping we can provide some clarity for folks.
Yeah, this is the most controversial one.
Yeah.
Let me just start with, ideally, if you have your best application early, if you know you've maxed out your LSAT, you've spent a year working on your essays, and it's totally buttoned up, of course, ideally, it's not going to hurt to apply in September or October. Of course not. Okay. But now we start getting into this world of mythology where people will tell you, I'm looking at the data and it's more likely to be admitted if you apply in September than October or November. That's false. You're confusing correlation with causation. Let me.
I read your LinkedIn post about this.
Yeah, this is the biggest battle I used to fight years ago was this myth that schools average LSAT scores, and now applicants realize they just care about the high score. But this myth drives me crazy. What's going on is if you apply in September, you probably already have a good application because you don't need another LSAT. If you're applying in September, I mean, not everyone, but you've taken the LSAT, you caught lightning in a bottle, or you just crushed it that day. You got your 176. So you don't have a 165. So that group of people is pretty freaking strong to begin with. There are more strong applicants. Also, they're not backlogged in the system. Also, when they get their admits, they're happy to go on in October or November and say, hey, it's November. I was admitted. And what the market says, and by market, I mean applicants, is, wow, this person applied in September and they were admitted. So there must be some magical advantage to applying in September. There is not. There is nothing magical about applying in September versus October or November. What's magical is having that 178. So if you're sitting in September 1 with an LSAT score that that you strongly think you can do better on because diagnostically you've tested better on, what I'm telling you is a 1-point increase in the LSAT is worth waiting till November to apply. You will literally open up another range of schools, and you will literally open up tens, if not many more, thousands of dollars, even with a 1-point increase in LSAT. Hadiyah, I had a client apply to Harvard in June. He contacted me. Yeah, he had a 4.0 and a 170 something years ago. And he contacted me and said, hey, I want to use your firm for next year. And I knew that cycle was down, so I knew there might be opportunities. So I said, I'll tell you what, let's apply this year. And if you get waitlisted or denied, we'll just do next year for free. He applied to Harvard in June and was admitted in July.
Wow.
Now, I don't want the takeaway to be drag your feet and wait. I want the takeaway to be the school, if they have need, will make room for a strong applicant. They're not going to make room for a rushed, weak applicant. So if your application in September is rushed and sloppy, or if you could have a higher LSAT score, don't listen to the myth that you need to apply in September. What you need to do is apply with your strongest application and your strongest LSAT score. Now, things start getting a little bit more competitive post-Thanksgiving. So, in December, a school's already made maybe 50% of their admits. For a few other schools, a very small percentage, maybe they've made 80% of their admits. So I would say in an ideal world, you have your best application in around late November, early December. That said, having done this for 26 years, having read 60,000 or more applications, if it's December 1 and I have a 160, and all the schools I'm dreaming about, their medians are around a 165, and I've been practicing in the 165, I'm going to wait for that 165, or I'm going to apply to that school and say, hey, I'm taking the LSAT again. And I'm betting on myself. You're my dream school. My score right now is a 160. Your median is a 165. Because I'm so interested in your school, please know I'm taking the LSAT in January because I'm betting on myself. Because they're probably going to want to wait for that 165 anyways. What they're not waiting for is the December 1 date stamp of your application.
Right. And I think
you're only late if you're applying in like January or beyond. And even then, I gave you a story. I mean, there are many people admitted to many great schools who apply in January and beyond. You're not helping yourself, but you're not closing. The gate to the castle is not closing on you just because it's January.
Right. I want to pull out a few helpful notes because I think you dropped a lot of gems for people. The first is like understanding what it truly means to apply early. And a lot of admissions officers will be honest about the fact that they're not even reading applications as early as September. And so what I'm hearing from you is that you think, applying early is really kind of that timeline before Thanksgiving, right? Maybe they would be like the earliest pool of folks. So that gives you like September, October, and all of November to get together your application. But something else I also heard you say too is that if you're a strong applicant, you're a strong applicant, right? And you were comparing your being a quote unquote strong applicant in relation to the medians in helping you determining you could maybe have the room to apply later.
Yeah. And what I would add to that is I would go to lsd.org and look at the data, and I would look at past data. There are a few schools, I think Duke being one of them, where late November might be a little late because they're making a lot of admits in September and October. Conversely, Stanford doesn't historically even start reading applications until January. So for Stanford, January 1 would be very early. So look at the data for the schools. But in general, I would say late November, early December is totally normal Totally fine. January is a little bit late, but there are still many admits available for strong applicants.
For sure, for sure. So we have made it to our last segment of our this interview. It is about crafting your narrative, which is something we preach a lot about at LawyHer, and about, your application being more than just your stats. And so I'm curious as to what you think makes a candidate's story feel authentic, even if they don't have those traditional markers of success.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure if we admissions officers even know what a great traditional marker of success is.
Right.
If you combine LSAT and GPA, you're still at what, about 50 to 60% of predicting first year GPA. That's the combination of LSAT. There's no test for motivation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So beyond the numbers, which are, and by the way, first year GPA has nothing to do with what kind of lawyer you're going to be. The LSAT, per research by Bill Henderson at Indiana, negatively correlates with networking ability. Now, this is not at I don't want someone with a 180 to send me an email telling me what a jerk I am. Not at the micro level, but at the macro level, the higher you score on the LSAT, the less adept you are at networking. To your point, I'm not even sure like these test scores really correlate well with what's a success marker for a good lawyer. But you know what correlates well? Passion for, I mean, you nailed it. You did this internship, you developed a passion, you spoke about your passion eloquently, but also with authenticity and conviction in your essays, and you got admitted to Yale Law School. So I've yet to meet someone in the 26 years I've been doing this. I've literally yet to meet someone who doesn't have a good personal statement in them.
Hmm.
Because by the time you're applying to law, even that 12, I mean, I was an admissions officer then, but by the time you're applying to law school, even that 12-year-old had passions. And guess what? You're not 12. You're probably 19 to 27 if you're listening to this.
Yeah.
There are things you've done in your life that can be expressed in your application, expressed in the interviews, that you have expertise in, skill in, knowledge in, passion and authenticity in, that are going to differentiate you from the stack of applications. All my life, I've wanted to be a lawyer. I joined the pre-law society. Your law school looks great from your website. Don't talk about them. I mean, you can in an interview, but in the personal statement, what is your story? What brings you to them? The only person, yourself. This is why interviews don't scare me. They can only ask me about myself or them, and they're probably going to ask me about me. And the only person that knows you is you. So there's no
Right.
wrong answer. The right answers are, what is the stuff that gets you fired up in a good way? In a good way, not an angry way. Does
Exactly.
that sort of help color in the success markers are who you are as a person? What are your convictions? What are your principles? To me, those are much better success markers than what was your GPA or what was your static LSAT score on a given day.
Yeah, I think that answers that question very beautifully, and I hope gives folks confidence and trust in relying on their story and not like some version of themselves that they think they need to portray themselves as. So for our
Yeah, I mean, they can. If you're writing something to impress someone else versus writing it, this is something I always tell people: write it for yourself,
mm,
and then have someone proofread it. But don't write it for an unknown admissions committee. And then, my final piece of advice would be, well, two things. One is you're a human, and so are these people. They're just humans. Like the word celebrity is a funny word to me. Robert Downey Jr., he's a celebrity, but he's just a human. He has
mhm.
his fallacies and he has his strengths. No different from you, no different from me. Same with admissions officers. And then the final piece of advice I would say is, as much as you're presenting as much as yourself, as well as yourself as possible, they're only seeing a snapshot of who you really are. So try not to personalize this stuff. If you get waitlisted, if you get denied, it's not a rejection on who you are as a person. And you don't know that school's applicant pool. They may have been dying to admit you. And I hear this all the time from people you've interviewed or are going to interview. We wish we could have admitted 1,000 more, but we could only make 300 admits. And there were 1,000 other people who on any given day were awesome. And we just had to make really tough choices. And we're kind of guessing at this.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I have one final question for you. If you could leave applicants, our audience, with one piece of advice about how to approach this process strategically and also with some self compassion, what would it be?
Yeah, talk to yourself like you would talk to a friend. We beat ourselves up too much.
Mhm.
So if you had a friend applying to law school and they were the first three schools they were denied to, you wouldn't be criticizing them. You would say, "Look, I know you. Hang in there, Hadiyah. You're gonna get admits because I know what kind of person you are. I know you applied to a good range of schools. I know you got to visit some and be your true authentic self. So, just because these first three schools were rough on you, don't be rough on yourself. So don't, be self Dr. Kristen Neff has a great book on self-compassion. Start
Mm.
with that. Like, learn what it is to talk to yourself like you would talk to a loved one. We're our own worst enemies in our heads when it comes to this application process. We overthink it. We overthink little things and we make mountains out of molehills. So think about maybe the best piece of advice is as you're applying, go slow and think, okay, how would someone else speak to me about what I'm doing versus how am I going to be overly critical? How am I going to have too much imposter syndrome when I speak to myself? And find someone else to bounce, our firm wouldn't exist if people didn't need people to bounce things off of. Now, you don't have to like use our firm. You can use our free advice online. We have, hundreds of TikToks, hundreds of podcasts, thousands of blogs. It's all free. Or you could talk to someone like Hadiyah or someone who's a lawyer who went through the process. But do have two sets of eyes on everything you do.
Certainly. I think that is such wonderful advice to end on. Thank you so much, Mike, for joining us today and for sharing your insights and just being honest and also providing a lot of care and helping us to mystify a lot of this process, right? And so I hope that anyone, if you're listening to this and you're feeling overwhelmed, I hope that you remember that no one's application is perfect. As Mike said, we are all just humans at the end of the day. Ultimately, we each have the power to frame our experiences how we choose to. And we hope that you'll do so honestly, strategically, but also at the end of the day, giving yourself a lot of self compassion because you all
Be,
deserve to take up space in this profession.
be
Again,
kind to yourself. Be
yes.
kind to yourself.
Be kind to yourself. Think and talk to yourself as we would talk to you, or as you would talk to your sister, or as you would talk to someone that you care about. At the end of the day, I think speak for both of us that we and so many people in this profession are rooting for you all to join us.
100%. Thank you for being kind to me, Hadiyah, and for the time. Thank you for your efforts in this space. I hope that, everything you're doing is helping people who may not have heard any admissions advice before or advice on what it takes to be a good lawyer. I hope it's really impacting as many people as I think it is. So thank you.
Thank you. Amazing. Well, Mike, we will just pause for a second so we'll have a screen grab when we share this on our social media. So I'm going to smile. Feel free to pose however you feel comfortable. Amazing.